My son resented me for being a workaholic and missing every important moment in his life. He coldly said, "You chose your career over me." When I tried to make amends, he shut the door in my face. I cried, "I did it all for you. But I lost you anyway." When I collapsed from exhaustion and he found my letters of regret, he realized the sacrifices I made. I was lying on the floor, my body barely responding. The room was spinning. My vision blurred and my breathing was shallow. A cold sweat covered my skin. I knew what was happening. I had pushed myself too far, too hard, for too long. I tried to call out, but no sound came. I could hear the distant ring of my phone. My work phone. The same phone that had ruled my life for decades. But now, in my final moments of strength, it was silent. No clients. No meetings. No deals. Just the steady hum of loneliness. And then, the door creaked open. Through my hazy vision, I saw him, my son. He stood frozen in the doorway, his face contorted with something between shock and anger. I wanted to speak, to tell him everything I had never said, but the words wouldn't come. He rushed toward me, his hands shaking as he reached for his phone. I wanted to tell him, "Don't call 911, just listen." But I was too weak. As the darkness closed in, I could only hope that maybe, just maybe, he would finally understand. The distance that grew between us, I wasn't always like this. I didn't always work myself to the point of collapse. But life has a way of pulling you under, and before you know it, you're drowning in responsibilities, gasping for air, and telling yourself it's all for your family. I had a wife once. I had a son. I had dreams of being the kind of father who never missed a game, who was always home for dinner, who knew his child's friends and favorite hobbies. But reality doesn't always match dreams. We lived in New York City, where life is unforgiving if you're not willing to fight for your place. I worked in finance. High stress, high risk, high reward. I started as an ambitious young man, promising my wife that it was just for now, that once I climbed the ladder, I'd slow down. Except the ladder never ends. I missed his first steps because of a last-minute client meeting. I missed his first soccer game because I was closing a deal in Chicago. I missed his school play because I was stuck in a late-night merger discussion. And every time, I told myself I'll make it up to him. But life doesn't let you make up time. You either show up or you don't. As he grew older, the distance between us became more than just physical. I would come home late at night, exhausted, barely able to mumble a few words before collapsing into bed. My wife tried to cover for me, telling him that Daddy's working hard for us, that I loved him. But love isn't just words. It's presence. And I wasn't there. By the time he was a teenager, the resentment had hardened in his eyes. He stopped asking if I'd make it to his games. He stopped looking for me in the audience. He stopped caring if I was there. And worst of all, I let it happen. The moment he shut me out, the night it all broke apart was the night of his high school graduation. I promised, swore, that I'd be there. Nothing would keep me away. But something did. A client emergency. A last-minute crisis. A deal that needed saving. I told myself I'd just be a little late. I told myself I'd still make it in time. But by the time I walked into that auditorium, the chairs were empty. The stage was dark. He was already gone. I came home to find my wife sitting alone at the dining table, staring at nothing. I didn't even get the chance to speak before she said, "He doesn't want to see you." I don't know what hurt more, the fact that I missed it, or the fact that he wasn't even surprised. I went to his room. Knocked. Silence. Knocked again. "Please, son. Let me talk to you." The door opened just enough for me to see his face, his cold, distant eyes. "You chose your career over me," he said. His voice was flat. Emotionless. Final. Then, he shut the door in my face. I stood there, staring at the wood, my hands trembling. I wanted to tell him he was wrong. I wanted to tell him that everything I did was for him. But the truth is, I didn't even believe it myself anymore. Letters never sent my wife left me 6 months later. She didn't yell. Didn't fight. Just packed her bags and said, "I can't do this anymore." I watched them go. I watched my son walk out the door without even looking back. I should have fought harder. I should have begged them to stay. But the truth is, I didn't know how to be a father anymore. I didn't know how to fix what I had broken. So instead, I did what I always did. I worked. Years passed. My son went to college. Then medical school. He became a doctor, something I should have been proud of if I had been there to witness it. I tried reaching out. He never answered. I sent letters, but he never wrote back. So I kept them. Stacks of unsent letters, gathering dust in my apartment. I was too much of a coward to send them. Until the night I collapsed. The moment he knew the truth, when I woke up, I was in the hospital. The beeping machines, the sterile smell of disinfectant, it all blurred together. And then I saw him. My son. He was standing by the door, his arms crossed, eyes sharp with something between anger and guilt. "Why didn't you tell me?" His voice was quiet. "Tell you what?" I croaked. He exhaled sharply. That you were sick. That you were. He stopped himself. He couldn't even say the word. I blinked at him, confused. Then I saw it. On the small table beside me, the stack of letters. The ones I never sent. I felt my breath hitch. I looked at him. His eyes were red, his jaw tight. He had read them. Every single one. The apologies. The regrets. The confessions of a father who had lost everything while trying to give his son the world. I thought you didn't care, he whispered. I swallowed, my throat thick with emotion. I always cared. A long silence stretched between us. A silence filled with years of missed moments. Then, for the first time in a very, very long time, he took a step closer. And I held my breath. For the first time in years, my son was standing close to me. But he didn't look at me the way a son should look at his father. There was no warmth, no relief, just hesitation. Like he wasn't sure if he had made a mistake by coming here. He picked up one of the letters, turning it over in his hands. His fingers trembled slightly, but his face stayed blank. You wrote all of these, he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded, my throat dry. You never sent them. Again, I nodded. He let out a sharp, bitter laugh. So what? You wrote down all your regrets and hid them away, and that was supposed to fix everything. His voice was rising, and I could see it now, the anger buried under the surface, waiting to explode. I read them, he said. His jaw clenched. I read all of them. I wanted to ask what he thought, but before I could, he slammed the stack of letters back onto the table. You don't get to write down an apology and expect me to forgive you, he snapped. You don't get to collapse in a pile of self-pity and suddenly have me running back to your side. His words hit harder than I expected. I know, I whispered. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing. You think this changes anything? You think it matters that you felt bad about missing everything? That you regretted putting work first? What am I supposed to do with that now? I opened my mouth, but no words came. Because he was right. What was I supposed to say? That I had wanted to be there? That I had tried to be a good father? That I had made a mistake? None of it mattered now. The damage was done. He shook his head, his eyes burning with frustration. You weren't there, Dad. You just weren't. And now, suddenly, you want to have this moment? You want me to cry and tell you I forgive you? I swallowed hard. I don't expect anything from you, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He scoffed. Good. Because I don't have anything to give. The twist I never saw coming, I thought that was it. I thought he would storm out of the hospital room and never look back. But then, he hesitated. He turned to the window, gripping the windowsill so hard his knuckles turned white. There's something I didn't tell you, he muttered. I frowned, waiting. His shoulders were tense, like he was forcing himself to say it. Then, finally, he turned around. His eyes met mine, and for the first time, I saw pain that went deeper than just anger. I didn't just come here because of you, he admitted. I came here because I needed to see you. I blinked. Why? He let out a slow breath. Because I made a mistake too. My heart pounded. What do you mean? He pulled out his phone, tapped the screen a few times, then turned it toward me. And what I saw nearly stopped my heart. It was a woman. A familiar woman. Her face was pale, her eyes tired. She was in a hospital bed. And I knew exactly who she was. My ex-wife. His mother. The clock was running out. She's sick, he said, his voice hollow. Stage 4. She didn't want to tell me at first, but I figured it out. She doesn't have much time. The weight of those words hit me like a freight train. I tried to speak, but my throat closed up. How long? I finally managed. He hesitated. Maybe a few months. Maybe less. I gripped the blanket covering me, my hands shaking. The woman I once loved. The mother of my son. Dying. I should have been there, he muttered. I should have. He stopped, closing his eyes tightly. And in that moment, I saw it. The same regret. The same guilt. He wasn't just angry at me. He was angry at himself. And suddenly, I understood. He wasn't here just because he found the letters. He was here because he was afraid of making the same mistake. A father, a son, and a choice for the first time in years, we weren't just two people fighting over the past. We were two people terrified of losing the future. I took a slow, shaky breath. We don't have to let this be the end, I whispered. He looked at me, his eyes full of conflict. You hate me, I said. I get it. You have every right to. But don't do what I did. Don't wait until it's too late. His jaw clenched, his fingers tightening around his phone. Then, after a long silence, he whispered, I don't know how to fix this. I swallowed back the lump in my throat. Neither do I. But we can start by trying. For the first time in years, he didn't push me away. And for the first time in years, I saw a glimmer of hope. The weight of the moment sat heavy between us. My son, the boy who had spent his whole life resenting me, was standing there, gripping his phone like it held all the answers. His mother, my ex-wife, the only woman I ever truly loved, was dying. And now, here we were. Two men with a lifetime of regrets, staring at each other, knowing that time was running out for both of us. But before I could say another word, the door to my hospital room burst open. And suddenly, everything took a turn I never saw coming. The past comes crashing and a man in a suit stormed into the room, followed by a nurse who was trying and failing to stop him. "Sir, you can't just— I have every right to be here," the man snapped, brushing past her. His eyes locked onto mine with an expression I had seen before, a mixture of fury and betrayal. And then, I recognized him. Michael Landry. One of my oldest business partners. The man I built my career with. The man whose life I destroyed. "What the hell are you doing here?" I croaked. He threw a thick envelope onto my hospital bed. "Read it." My hands were shaking as I picked it up. I could feel my son watching, confused, his eyes darting between me and Michael. I pulled the papers out, legal documents, dozens of them. And as I skimmed the words, my blood ran cold. Fraud. Embezzlement. Lawsuits. I looked up at Michael, my heart pounding. "What is this?" His face twisted in disgust. "You really don't know?" he sneered. "You think you can just disappear and not deal with the mess you left behind?" I shook my head. "I don't understand." "Oh, you will," he cut in. "Because in about 2 days, this is going public." My son tensed beside me. "What the hell is going on?" Michael turned to him, his eyes full of something almost pitying. "You don't know, do you?" I felt a lump form in my throat. "Michael, no. He deserves to hear it." Then, he turned fully to my son. "You want to know why your father missed all your important moments? Why he was never there?" He let out a cold laugh. "Because he wasn't just working. He was screwing people over." The truth no one knew. I felt my stomach drop. "No," I said weakly. "That's not—" Michael ignored me. "Your dad and I built a company together. We worked our asses off. And then one day, he decided he wanted more. He started shifting money, making deals behind my back. I trusted him, and his voice broke with rage. He stabbed me in the damn back." I felt my son stiffen beside me. "That's not true," I croaked. Michael turned back to me, eyes burning. "Then explain why the SEC is crawling all over our old company. Explain why I'm the one getting sued while you've been sitting here feeling sorry for yourself." I gripped the sheets, my heart racing. This wasn't right. This wasn't how it happened. Yes, I had made bad decisions. But I wasn't the villain here. I looked at my son, panic rising in my chest. "You have to believe me." He held up a hand. His face was blank, but I could see the storm brewing in his eyes. "No," he said. "No more lies. No more excuses." I swallowed hard. And then he asked the one question I wasn't ready for. "Did you do it?" The air in the room felt like it had been sucked out. Michael was staring at me, waiting. My son was staring at me, waiting. And for the first time in my life, I didn't have the right answer. The lies I told myself I had spent so many years justifying my choices, telling myself that everything I did was for my family. But the truth was, I had made compromises. I had taken shortcuts. I had done things I wasn't proud of. And now, it had all come back to haunt me. I could feel the walls closing in. My body was weak, my heart pounding against my ribs like a drum. If I told the truth, I could lose my son forever. If I lied, he might never trust me again. So I did the only thing I could do. I looked him in the eye. And I whispered, "I don't know." The breaking point, my son's face didn't change. He didn't scream, didn't lash out. But the silence between us was worse than any shouting match. Michael scoffed. "You don't know? Bullshit." He turned to leave. "I hope you enjoy what little time you have left," he muttered. "Because once this story hits the press, you'll be lucky if you die with even a shred of dignity." And then, just like that, he was gone. I turned back to my son. He was staring at the floor, gripping the back of a chair so hard his knuckles were white. I tried to reach for him. "Please," he stepped back. "I need time." I felt my chest tighten. "Time for what?" He looked up, and for the first time, I saw something new in his eyes. Fear. "I don't know if I want to be like you," he whispered. And with that, he walked out, leaving me alone. Again. The room was empty again. First my wife. Then my son. Now Michael. It was like life was stripping me down to nothing, leaving me alone to rot in a hospital bed. But I wasn't dead yet. And if Michael thought he could destroy what little I had left without a fight, he was about to learn who I really was. The truth they didn't know. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Michael had walked in here, thrown those papers down, and acted like he was the victim. But I knew the truth. I may have made bad choices, but I wasn't the one who burned the company to the ground. Michael was. And I had proof. The files that could ruin him years ago, back when I was still drowning in work, I had started to notice small irregularities in our accounts. Money moving in ways it shouldn't. Contracts signed without my approval. Payments to offshore accounts that didn't make sense. At first, I ignored it. I was too busy chasing deals, too buried in work to care. But one night, I stayed late in the office. And what I found changed everything. Michael had been shifting money, hiding debts under my name, covering his own tracks while setting me up as the fall guy. I should have confronted him. Should have walked away. Should have done something. But I didn't. Because I was weak back then. I told myself I'd fix it later. I told myself I had time. Now, time was exactly what I didn't have. One last move, I reached for my phone with shaky fingers. My body was weak, but my mind was sharp. I pulled up my old email account, the one I hadn't touched in years. And there it was. An encrypted folder labeled Landry Files. I had saved everything. Bank records, emails, contracts he forged. Everything I needed to destroy Michael Landry. The call that changed everything. I dialed a number I never thought I'd call again. It rang twice before he picked up. Dad? My son's voice was cautious, unsure. I took a slow breath. I need you to come back. Silence. Then, finally, why? Because you need to see the truth. A father and son, one last time. An hour later, he was standing by my bedside again. His eyes were guarded, his posture tense. I turned my phone toward him. Read it. He hesitated, then took the phone. As he scrolled, his face changed. Confusion. Then realization. Then something close to rage. This, he looked up. This proves it wasn't you. I nodded. He swallowed hard. Why didn't you fight back? I looked at him, my voice tired but firm. Because I was too busy losing you. His jaw tightened. For the first time, I saw the walls between us crack. He looked back at the screen. What do you want to do with this? I gave him a small, tired smile. I think it's time we get some revenge. The fall of Michael Landry. The next morning, my son did something I never thought he'd do. He fought for me. He used his contacts as a doctor, reached out to people I could never reach alone. Lawyers, investigators, journalists. And within 48 hours, the headlines hit every major news site. Michael Landry's web of lies, CEO caught in multi-million-dollar fraud scandal. By the time the police came knocking on his door, it was too late for him to run. A son's choice. The day after Michael's arrest, my son came back. He stood by the door, watching me. This time, he didn't look at me like a stranger. I nodded toward the chair beside my bed. Sit. He did. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then, quietly, he asked, did you ever really love us? Or was it always just about work? I felt my throat tighten. I loved you more than anything. I just didn't know how to show it. He looked down, his hands clenching. I spent my whole life hating you. I swallowed hard. I know. He let out a slow breath. I don't know if I can forgive you. I nodded. I don't expect you to. Silence stretched between us. Then, for the first time in years, he reached out. His hand covered mine. It was small. A simple gesture. But to me, it meant everything. And for the first time in my life, I realized maybe I hadn't lost him after all.